This is Reframe, the podcast from the College of Education, Health, and Society on the campus of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. When we talk about inequality and poverty, there's one issue that's rarely addressed. It's something that's often hidden away, something most of society tries to make invisible, even though it's a natural part of life that affects more than 800 million people every day. For many women, as well as for many transgender men, the menstrual period can still be a source of financial hardship, shame, embarrassment, and even inequity. So here at Miami, there is a movement building around a new student outreach project called Periods Rock, which addresses issues such as period poverty, the pink tax, and the ongoing social stigma that continues to persist in so many ways. And here to talk about their efforts are Richelle Frabotta, the coordinator of the Sexuality Education Studies Center here at Miami, and two of her students, Phoebe Carlson, a senior public health major, and Kristen Capon, a junior studying family science. All right, so Richelle, Phoebe, Kristen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
To begin, can you give us an overview of the project? Can you describe Periods Rock? What is the project? What is it all about?
Sure. Let me just offer the idea. Last year, I was rolling around my home city of Dayton, and I saw some really cool women, and they were collecting pads and tampons. And so I went up, I talked to them, I went home, I got some products, I donated them, and I found out, oh, wow, this period poverty stuff is a thing. And I was impressed with these women, and I thought, hey, we should do this at Miami. We have resources, and why wouldn't this project fly? And the Sex Ed Studies Center is a totally appropriate place to marry policy, research, and practice, especially with no need connection to the community. So I came in and I have these wonderful undergraduate associates that I work with, all independent studies, and I said Phoebe, I said Kristen, and then there's a whole bunch of others on our team as well. Hey, let's do this. And that's when Phoebe said,
we're here as Periods Rock to address period poverty at a more local level. We want to start locally and really expand out as we continue this program through semesters here at Miami. Our goal is to collect as many period products as possible and then redistribute them to local places that are in need of donated period products, like local prisons, local community centers, churches, like wherever we can donate products and get them to people who need them the most is really what we're about.
And this idea of period poverty is one of the big central themes that connects a lot of your work with this project. So what is period poverty and why is this such an issue?
Yeah, so period poverty, I believe, is like the lack of having the resources or the ability to have the resources for women's hygiene.
It's exactly that. It's women and girls, and this also, James, includes trans men. So we want to be clear when we say, basically what we're saying is people who have periods. So people who have periods often don't have access to resources, like Kristen said, and that's the poverty part. And the reason that the poverty exists is basically threefold. One is there's literally a lack of money available to impoverished people who have periods to go buy these products. I remember the stat about how many years a person who has periods has a period, like over the lifespan, it's about 7 years.
Yep, it's 7.
And then the total cost, if you spend, say, $10 to $20 a month for 12 months times 7 years, that is some cash. So there's literal poverty involved with this. And then access. And so the ability to go to a place like a store and then buy the products can be challenging, especially for people who have periods in rural areas or people in urban areas who just run a life that's so complex and so complicated because periods just happen, right? And so when periods just happen, if you don't have your stash, then you have a problem. And then the third area that involves this idea of poverty are unfair practices, capitalistic practices such as pink tax. And I know the policy team has done some really good thinking and reading and idea generating about pink tax.
Can you describe what that is? What is the pink tax?
So the pink tax is basically a tax on women's products. And that's like, for a t-shirt, for example, it's like $10 extra. For a woman's t-shirt versus a man's, it could be the same material, it can be made from the same people, it can look exactly the same. But the difference is companies like to
upcharge.
they like to upcharge because women in society are known for being a little bit more upkeep, and we're a lot more of a problem in the sense of when you're marketing, we're the marketing lens. That's who they want to see. That's who they're marketing towards. And in that, one of the problems is that a lot of women are paying so much money for the same materials, and quite honestly, it's not fair. So.
And that idea carries absolutely to feminine hygiene products.
Yeah.
And that, do you recall doing some reading about it?
Obviously, like, feminine hygiene products are upcharged immensely, and it's just because people don't consider them like
necessary
necessary to live. But I mean, all females or people who have periods would happily disagree to that.
This is rooted in some isms,
Yeah.
which is another one of the reasons that Sex Ed Studies Center, we wanted to do this, is because we're very aware of inequities. And so there's some misogyny in here. There's a lot of classism in here. There's just the idea that female bodies doing natural things like menstruating just should be invisible or not noted. It's things that I'm used to hearing about in sexuality. For example, the G-spot, which is uniquely an area in female bodies that causes pleasure, wasn't actually named until 1973. Or that the current drawings that we have of clitoral physiology didn't actually get generated until the early 90s. And that's kind of ridiculous. So this, I think, this idea of poverty that we're talking about in a large sense as related to people who have periods is just another example of marginalization. And so those are, sharing resources with folks who don't have them or can't get them easily is a great outcome. But honestly, the work that we're doing is about making things more equitable by raising awareness. All the research that the Periods Rocks team has done, there's a passion here along with this learning. That's a huge benefit to a project like this.
It's interesting that this idea of poverty can be expanded to include more than just, like a lack of money, because I think a lot of people would immediately equate the idea of poverty to just, socioeconomic status. But I think it's good you make it clear that this idea of period poverty can affect people on like many more levels than just money alone, which I think also leads to some of the policies behind some of the practices that are involved here, which I know is also part of the Periods Rock project. There's the research that's gone into the policy. And one of the things I've heard you talk about with regards to this project recently was something called the Murphy's Law of Menstruation. And Kristen, I was wondering if you could kind of give us a little more background, explain what is that? What is the Murphy's Law of Menstruation?
Yeah, so the Murphy's Law of Menstruation is basically, it is a bill that went through New York, and the purpose of it was to have free women's hygiene products available to those that are incarcerated and those who are in public schools, in public areas. So I was actually doing a lot of research on that actually last night, and there's a few flaws in there. Like, for example, it sounds all nice, and it's great, but the problem that they're facing currently is that they don't have the money to do it. And that's something, Illinois, there's 3 states that are doing it currently, and it's not exactly called the Murphy's Law of Menstruation, but they're doing their own example of it. Illinois is in debt. I don't know how they're doing it specifically, but New York, they're forcing the schools to pay for it. And that's a budget that they're already trying to cover toilet paper, they're already trying to cover soap, and those are actually things that are mandated for them to pay for. So having this, brought in, it's starting to create a little bit of an issue. But the Murphy's Law of Menstruation is supposed to bring these women hygiene products, like let it be available. And so far, it seems to be working, but it is bringing up a lot of budget issues. And if we can get around that in Ohio, I would like to see that. By being able to look at Ohio and comparing us to New York, California, and Illinois, we'll know what's wrong. We'll be able to figure out where we can take a step and where we can speak to our legislators and what we can fix. Because there is data that supports it, and there's also data that helps us fix it. So it's just kind of back and forth.
How's the process going in California?
So in California, they just passed it where it's free products. And they're still having a lot of issues because a lot of their legislators are men. And a lot of their legislators do not agree with it. They do not understand it. And that's simply because they're not period havers. They're not in the same shoes as us, or they don't understand the implications of not having a tampon on you or not having a pad on you or having to rush home or not even having the ability to rush home. Like you could be like a freshman in high school or even middle school and not have that ability. So they're still working with that. Illinois, there's not much that came up with it. They passed it. They set aside a budget for it. That's all I got on them. New York is the leader here. New York is the one that has passed the law, has made it with a study that mentioned, I think it was 18 to 54-year-old women were period havers. With that, they just discussed that, like, here's how it feels when you don't have that. Here's how it feels when you don't have a period. And they focused on it. And they also focused on the ability of not being able to get those resources, which can play a huge role when 2 out of 3 people are, who live in period poverty can't get resources.
How much of this problem do you think is due to the social stigma that still seems to exist, or even maybe just the unwillingness to have these kinds of conversations? I think the word you used before was invisible, which seems like that is also part of the problem here, or part of the issue, culturally speaking, I would imagine.
So, and again, getting down to what I'm used to thinking and hearing about as a sexuality educator is the idea of the shame that goes along with what is a typical process that happens to a majority of women, girls, and trans men. This is just what the body does. Yet we have centuries of cultural norming, including shaming, around this process. So this is frustrating, and the shame and the guilt, the heavy emotion. So I did a presentation yesterday to colleagues on campus, and after the presentation, one of my peers came up and said, hey, maybe we could get some time together to talk about this. And I'm like, sure. And she identified having a young person, an 11, 12-year-old girl who is terrified to start her period because she feels like she won't be prepared. Now, because my colleague has resources, including excellent parenting skills, she has a stash already to go in her child's book bag. The child felt uncomfortable carrying the stash. So when we have developing girls who we, I think in this room, agree should be proud to be developing girls moving to women, what does it say that to carry a bag of pads or tampons is awkward and uncomfortable? What does it say when she gets closer to thinking she might have her period, she's going to be sick and miss a day of school? And she, like I said, my colleague is an excellent parent. We had great conversation. They have resources. Yet this high anxiety and emotional distress, it exists. And I cannot imagine, and that's the point I think Phoebe's making and Kristen's making with the policy, is how do we walk a world that stacks things against us, meaning period havers, people have periods. How do we walk this world that has so many things stacked against us and compound it by literally being too poor, overtaxed, or unable to get the products? Free bleed is not pretty. And there isn't a woman on the planet who hasn't had that moment where it's like, uh-oh, what am I going to do about this? So much shame is attached to it, and it's really ridiculous.
Odd fact. Did you know Instagram takes off pictures if it has any type of red stain because of your period?
Are you kidding?
No, not at all. There's it's just for
Wait, no, I definitely think I saw something in the past that I definitely saw, it was like on Self Magazine or some like Instagram like account like that, or like Health Mag or something like that, where it was someone who had like a period stain on like their pajamas in bed or something like that, and it was like taken off of Instagram for like being deemed like inappropriate or like not fit for because like nobody should be looking at that or something, and that to me is just ridiculous.
It's just it's an odd thing that I noticed. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like a red spot? And it could be marker. And they just take it off because people just assume that it's a period.
Seems like a pretty powerful example of the social stigma that still exists.
Yeah. I mean, it's
definitely... also, if women want to post about it, it's their body, it's their prerogative in my... Like, obviously people are going to disagree with everything I'm saying right now. But...
I won't do it, but if you want to do it.
No, I won't, honestly. I probably wouldn't either, but like if...
Okay, but why not?
It definitely is that stigma, quite honestly. Like, I mean, going back to like, okay, so when I was in elementary school, like, I think it was like 4th grade actually. 4th grade, I had like panty liners because like I was like, started spotting very early, and I dropped them all over the floor. And I had an anxiety attack. I was like, what is this? Like there were boys like staring at me, and they were like, what are these blue things? And I'm like, let me have that back. So it's just a fear, and it stems from a young place. And it really does.
It does.
It stems from, you sneaking tampons up your sleeve.
Or when we were even taught about our periods in elementary school, they like wanted us to keep it a secret, or at least the way it was kind of taught to me when I was in elementary school. Yeah,
you need nicknames.
They like wanted you to
Shark
like keep
Week.
it to yourself. They like wanted it to be like a thing only like you knew about and weren't telling everyone about. That's kind of the way they taught it to you as. And not that I was like embarrassed about having my period like growing up, because like whatever, I knew it was normal. But I think it's just the act of like people like you were talking about like free bleed is like nobody wants to like have visible like blood, like at least that I know anyway. I can't be talking about the world, but nobody wants to have like visible blood stains like on their clothes out in public. So I think that's kind of my same looking at social media.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to have this blood stain on me in public, so why would I want to have it like in public online?
Bleeding through white pants, like that's
literally
image.
my
It's
biggest
always white
fear
pants.
still today. If I'm even on like in general on my period, I will not wear like a very light colored or white pants. I won't do it.
Yeah.
It makes me too, even though I know in my head that I won't bleed through, I still just don't do it because it makes me too scared.
This is fascinating. You are feisty and badass, and you're still, wow.
Yeah, it's just what you grow up kind of being accustomed to.
Nah, we're going to change that.
At this point, it's definitely gotten easier as we've gotten older. Like I feel like, because now I'll just carry a tampon and be like, hey, how
I
you
don't
doing?
care. Yeah.
This right here is for me.
I think it's
Like,
just
don't
more
care.
as you grow up, because I think the awareness spreads more to like people who aren't having their period. They're like, oh, well, girls have their period, like whatever. Like I think in college it's not really as much of an issue, but I still even think in high school, when you're like younger in high school, I feel like people still think it's like, I should like hide my tampon in my sleeve or whatever else.
You know what's an important point to take out of this?
What?
Now that I really just got this. So something that I'm picking up, like a mood here, is that it's the amount of awareness. Because if you really focus on it, the amount of awareness of your period, that's where the fear stems from. Because the opposite gender, the other people
Don't
that
know
aren't
about it
you
when you're first getting
don't
it.
know about it. They don't know what it is. So it's weird. Like, what is that red stain? They don't know what it is. What's that contraption? Like, it's just a powerful thought.
It is.
Because now you can really take what we just talked about and stem it all the way back to the awareness, to the period tax or pink tax and the period poverty. All of that, to this day, at least politically, is a problem because people aren't aware. They don't know what's going on. So if you, for example, were probably to have a male who grew up with sisters and understood the period process, he may or may not be more likely to pass a policy because he understands it. So
I definitely
honestly,
think that would be true if it like males growing up with a bunch of sisters and knowing about periods through their siblings, like.
Well, but what's also implied is that the house where this inter-sibling relationships are happening is open. And I don't know about you, but Thanksgiving Day when I was in 4th grade and 9 years old, and that's when I got my period. And I had a whole bunch of Italian people eating food out in the other room, and there was no way I was going to let them know.
Right.
And so we talk, there's an air of, for those of us who have been in houses, and it wasn't a shameful thing in my house, it wasn't a religious thing in my house, it was just a you don't deal with it thing. It's an invisibility thing.
Yeah.
But
and I think that's how I grew up too, honestly. It was never like a...
Yet, I bet, a lot of times if there is a body development conversation that happens in middle schools, often thinking about binary genders, they're segregated. So boys learn this, girls learn that. And just as a point in case for sexuality education, I refuse to teach segregated classrooms.
Oh, yeah.
So 4th through 6th grade that I taught, when I was invited in as a guest speaker, I would never separate the kids. We all need to learn about body function.
Oh, yeah. But I think that's what, like, I think this is what Chris and I were getting at earlier with, like, the whole, like, awareness from, like, a young age thing. Yeah. I think if it all started with not separating out the genders when we were taught about each other's each gender's bodies in the first place, I feel like it would avoid so much embarrassment and stigma kind of bouncing it out on both sides.
No, it's about being human.
Yeah.
This is about body function and physiology, and that's where I teach it from. I don't teach it from a values lens. I don't teach it from an economic lens. I mean, it's just, this is what humans experience. And most humans. There are some that don't. But.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet, one of the last things that we haven't mentioned is there's basically two sides to the Periods Rock project, where you have the research and the policy side, which we have talked a lot about, but then you also have the distribution plan, where you're partnering with local businesses and schools and organizations to not only raise awareness, but also to collect donations and then to actually distribute them. So how is the distribution plan going? How is that working?
I'm trying to think of, off the top of my head, all the specific places. There are tons of places we've thought about taking our products to. I had already mentioned local prisons and middle schools. So locally, we're looking to do most of our distribution, but I guess to kind of get our name out there more and help whoever we can help, we're definitely looking to distribute elsewhere as well.
And specifically, we looked at Haven House and Hope House
Yeah.
in Middletown, and they're both nonprofit agencies that on their websites have said specifically that they'd like to receive products. And then, like Phoebe said, we're looking at middle schools, in particular in Middletown. And then also, I have some contacts in Dayton. So I'll contact that group and ask them where they'd like some products to go. I do want to say all the great work that students are doing on all these levels, whether that is economic or access or age differential with periods, or recognizing that trans men may have periods. There's so many places to get involved, but the bottom line to this is equity, and taking away some shaming that it just really isn't helpful in our culture anymore to have shame around these body functions such as menstruation. So that's definitely my big push.
All right, wonderful. Well, good luck with all your efforts and with all you're doing to raise awareness and to collect and donate these products. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
And if you'd like more information about the mission and the services of the Sexuality Education Studies Center here at Miami, or if you'd like to get in contact with Richelle Frabotta, you can go to miamioh.edu/SESC. And this is the Reframe Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there are many more episodes for free right now on Apple Podcasts and on Google Play Music.